Okay, so now let's emit smoke out of these yellow particles. For that, in our monster particles module, we need to go under particle update and search for set. And you want the set fluid source attributes. And so density in this case means smoke. 1 is usually too much, so I'll just set it to 0.5. And then we need to go to emitter summary, source, and say use emitter source. Then under emitter binding, you need to tell it which emitter you want to use, and we want to use our monster particles. So I'll just double click, delete this, and start typing emitter, and it's going to give me the monster particles here. So just click on that, then click away for it to update, and here you go. It's already working, and the smoke is being emitted out of our character. We can turn off the sprite renderer because I don't want to see the yellow particles anymore. So now back in our scene, I can tell that it's working, except the grid is way too small. So we need to just play with the sizing of everything to make the monster fit. So this requires a bunch of back and forth of just changing the size of the grid and playing with the pivot until the monster is exactly where you want it to be inside of the grid. But since I've done this before, I'll just give you the numbers. So I'll do 2000 on the X, 1500 on the Y, and 1000 on the Z. And for the pivot, I did minus 0.2 on the X, 0.2 on the Y, and 0.48 on the Z. Now you can also move the entire grid higher until it's right on top of the ground like this. The smoke is not being evenly emitted from the character, and that's actually because of the collisions. So the smoke is born, but it immediately collides, and that just kind of kills the smoke. So what we are going to do in this case is go under collisions and collide against, and you can uncheck mesh collisions. So now the smoke is not colliding with anything, which allows it to just beautifully get spawned across the entire monster, just like this. But in this case, I actually want the smoke to collide with the ground. And so a little trick we're gonna do is we're gonna make it collide with the grid box. So here under boundary, you have open boundary minus Z. Minus Z is the ground, plus Z is the ceiling. So I will uncheck minus Z. And this means that the boundary is closed on the bottom of the grid, so it will actually collide with the floor. And so this is a great start. We have the core of the setup done, and now we just need to address the visual issues one by one and improve how this simulation looks. So just by looking at it, I want the smoke to be slightly heavy and falling toward the ground. I also want it to have more detail, so we need to increase resolution. I want to change its color to make it look more like sand. And then we can definitely work on the behavior of the smoke to get some nice turbulence and waves inside of it. So let's address it one thing after another. So under Simulation tab, we need to increase the resolution. Now I am recording this course on a 4090 RTX. Depending on the strength of your graphics card, you may not be able to set this as high as me, which is okay. This is all about just learning. So by all means, if you need to, keep this resolution low. For me, I will set it to 350 for now. For my final resolution for the trailer, I actually did 450. So already just by changing the resolution, we get much nicer behavior in the smoke. We're starting to get some nice puffs and all that. I'm also going to increase the pressure solve iterations from 6 to 10. This not only improves collisions, but it also improves the overall behavior of the smoke. Next, we said we wanted the smoke to be slightly heavy and falling down, and that's controlled with the density buoyancy. So negative buoyancy actually means that it's going up. Positive buoyancy means that it's going to be going down. In my case, I set this to 2. Now it's starting to get a bit slow for me, and that's because the simulation is running in both the viewport and Niagara. So you can just click on this button here to stop the simulation at 0, and it will only be running in our viewport from now on. But the monster is too big, and I remembered I did scale it down in the end. So you can just unlink the Niagara system just by selecting it and dragging it away. This will unlink it. And then let's set the scale of the monster to 5 instead of 10. And then you can reattach the Niagara system. So again, drag it on top of the animation and say none. And maybe move the simulation box back a little bit so it just barely covers the monster, because we don't really care what's going on the back side. We will only see it from the front. Okay, next I want to push the dust to the left. So under emitter summary, forces, you can go to wind and enable calculate wind. The wind direction needs to be -1 on the X. And for the wind magnitude, I ended up doing 40. But the smoke basically needs to be broken up with turbulence to avoid these very visible linear lines. So let's go to turbulence 1 and enable calculate turbulence. Now, as of version 5.7, you can control the frequency on each axis individually, but I just want to control all of them together with one number. So I'll click on the arrow and say vector from float. Let's leave it at 1 for now. And then we need to give it some gain. So for the turbulence gain, again, I want to click on the arrow and say vector from float. And I will set it really high so we can see it. So I'll set it to 2000. Right, so now the smoke is being completely broken up with turbulence as soon as it's born. So if I lower the frequency to 0.01, I'm essentially gonna get much bigger waves, right? So that's important to understand how the frequency works. The lower the value for the frequency, the bigger the noise waves. And the higher the number, so if I set it back to 1, the more granular and small the noise gets. So I will actually set this to 0.01, and then we need to set the value to about 500. Now even 500 is way too strong in this case. So final number, I'll set the value to 150, and let's give it a speed so that the noise changes over time. I'll set that to 1. And so we have something pretty nice and subtle, just like this. And so I'll just move our character a bit closer to frame this, maybe in a bit more interesting way. I basically want the monster to take over the whole frame to make it look huge, get the camera close to the ground, kind of looking up at the monster to make it look dominant, and move the character in the foreground just like this. We can hide the bounds of the simulation at this point, so emitter summary, simulation, uncheck draw bounds. And I would like to change the color of the smoke. So under render tab, where we haven't been yet, under smoke color, you can just start dragging this into more kind of orangey desert colors. It's very sensitive to the saturation, so already it looks too orange. So you need to do just a very subtle amount of the saturation here. Just a touch of that desert yellow. But still, it looks way too opaque and dark, so we need basically more light to penetrate the dust. For that, you can go into your directional light and search for volume. And here you have the volumetric scattering. So if you increase this really high to, let's say, 50, it's going to bring so much more light into the dust. So I think maybe 3. And I also want to do something about these super black dark shadows. So for that, we can just create another light. So I'll just go to create lights. Let's make a rectangular light. Maybe hit G so you can see where it is. Increase the intensity to maybe 500. Then E to rotate toward the black shadow area. Let's give it that sand color a little bit. And then start lowering the intensity. And then you need to go to cast, search for cast, and enable cast volumetric shadow. And then search for volume, and again increase the volumetric scattering to 3. And then you can grab your directional light and do Ctrl L, hold Ctrl, and then move your mouse to move the sun. And I just want to move the sun to the other side of the monster. Maybe make it a little bit of a sunset, so move the sun down. So I'll set my resolution to 400 and play it to look at what we have right now. So we're basically there. I would consider the simulation itself to be done. At this point, we can just work on how the scene looks. So I will go to Window, Quixel Bridge, and I will use this rippled sand texture. If you no longer have access to the Quixel Bridge assets for free, then if you go under Window, Fab, you can click on any Quixel asset and then click on the Quixel Creator. And here you can set the price to free. And then if you go under materials and textures, you can see all the different materials that are still free. So you can probably find some decent ground material here. For me, I'll use the rippled sand, but I want to set the quality to be highest quality and then add it because we want to do the nanite displacement for the ground. And so I want to open a second content browser. So under Window, Content Browser 2, and then you can go into your Witcher course, Materials, right click, Material, and call it m_sand ground. Open it up, and basically the easiest way to get nanite displaced material is just to create a new material from scratch using the Quixel textures. So I will just select the 3 textures that come with the sand material and drag them into my new material that I just created. So the first texture will go into base color. The normal map will go into normal. And then we need the displacement, but it's grayed out. So you can select the whole node of the material and search for tests. And you want to say enable tessellation. This will make displacement available to you. And then you have this texture, which actually has multiple textures inside of it, just under different color channels. And so the way to connect this is the red channel will go into your ambient occlusion. The green channel is your roughness. And the blue channel is actually your displacement. And then how much displacement you're gonna get, again, we need to select the material node and search for displacement. And here you have displacement magnitude. You can set it to about 5. That's what I did, and save. Now you can hide the Niagara system so it's not slow and distracting. If you apply the material to the ground right now, it's not gonna work because the geo needs to be nanite enabled. So with the floor selected, I'll do Control B to navigate to the asset. And then you wanna do Control D to make another copy, which I already have here called Floor 1. So you can right click on that and then go to nanite and make sure you check nanite enabled. I will simply drag the floor copy into the scene, zero out the location, set the scale to 8, which is what the original had, and you can delete the original floor. And so now in our materials folder, I can simply apply our M sand ground that we just created, and it should load up. And now if you go down with your camera, you can see that it is actually displaced, which does make a huge visual difference to how it actually looks compared to it just being a flat texture. So if I enable our Niagara system again, it's starting to look pretty nice. Now I think that the sand is way too yellow compared to the texture. So what you can do actually is just detach the Niagara system, go to the render smoke color and click on this sample, and you can sample the color directly from the texture. It might be a bit too saturated again by default, so then just drag the saturation lower until you get that nice dusty color. So I'd say now it's matching pretty nicely, starting to look pretty good. The performance is a bit rough, but that's because I'm recording my screen in 2K. If I'm not recording my screen, it is much smoother, just so you guys know. But right now we can maybe just add some volumetric fog to this. So under exponential height fog, you can enable volumetric fog and set that to about 0.1, maybe 0.25 actually. And let's give the albedo a slight orangey desert color also to make everything blend together. And to make the framing a bit tighter, you can also go under camera settings and increase the focal length to kind of zoom in and then move the camera back. And this will give the illusion of the character being closer to the monster and also make the monster look even larger scale. Something like this. Be careful about the focus. She's slightly out of focus, so you can play with the focus distance until she is in focus. And final touches, you can also search for post, process volume, search for UNB and make it unbound, and then search for contrast and just give it a little bit of contrast, maybe 1.2. And then you can search for vignette and enable vignette and increase that. This will kind of darken the corners a little bit. In the trailer shot, I also added some Quixel rocks in the background. I will let you play with that and make the environment anything that you would like. Mainly just wanted to show you the Niagara fluids. So if I play this back, here we go. So this is your first complete Niagara fluid simulation with some nice turbulence, wind. We covered a lot in these last two videos, and I have another example for you in the next lesson. So I'll see you there.